Let me tell you, getting glue everywhere is a bad deal. It's a bad deal. It's so bad. Hey everyone, Aaron Lovejoy here from Miniature Monthly, and we are fresh off our very first ever Miniature Monthly Masters painting competition. Now we had some really good entries and I'm proud of all of you. And one of the things that people keep asking me is, what can I do to level up? And first things first, now this is a problem I see a lot in the competition, model prep. So you want to paint display figures? Well, let me tell you, bad model prep can ruin the best paint job in the world. You may have noticed that the more detailed a kit gets, the more numerous and smaller the parts get. I love tiny pieces, said no one ever. First off, Kingdom Death has a really cool website. It's called build.kingdomdeath.com. Alright, as you can see, we've got all the main heroes and a bunch of the monsters here. And all we gotta do is, like in the case of the White Lion, click on it, and here we go. These are all the parts. If you look at the sprues, they're all labeled, so you can find all the pieces very easily. And let me tell you, it totally pays to double check the parts before you start building. Alright, so I got the White Lion parts laid out here. We've got them all cleaned, and let's take another look again at the computer and see if we've got all the parts. Alright, that looks pretty good. We've got both pieces of the torso. We've got the back two legs, the front two legs, the tail, the 3 unattached paws, and then the 2 mouth parts. So I think we got all the parts. Let's get moving on this. So some things to remember when prepping plastic models for higher end painting. I always like to, all the edges where another part is going to, kind of fit together like this. On some of the edges where there's smooth areas out here, not the fur areas, but just the back, I like to round off that leading edge between the 2 pieces. Alright, so here we have a side view of our lion. And these are the plastic parts. And these are the gaps, the space between each piece. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to put a little beveled edge, the edge of each of these gaps. So basically your piece will look like this. And you're just going to cut off the edge right there. You can just file that right off. Once those pieces are glued together properly, you can fill them with your putty. And in our case, we filled a little bit higher than what we needed and then just sanded it and filed it off until it was perfectly smooth. You could also, if you're just trying to go fast, just wet a brush and wipe it over the epoxy sculpt, and that should smooth it out very nicely. So remember, I've already cleaned this model. Now I'm going back and modifying parts to help me with the gap filling process. I'm also looking for mold lines I missed or areas that are kind of wonky, so I'm giving it a second once over. So not a whole lot, just a little bit. Just kind of file it away. File these things away. And the reason for that is when we put our putty in there to fill those gaps, I want it to have somewhere to sit down into. So we're not doing it a whole lot, just a little bit. The other thing you want to remember is you can kind of see that little bit of a mold line still left on there. Now you might say, oh, this is going to be under, there's going to be a leg on top of that, so it doesn't matter. But I like to get those mold lines, get rid of them, because it will lift up just a little bit, and when that leg sits down on there, I want it to join in really perfectly. So I don't want mold lines to cause me problems with parts not fitting correctly. So I had this friend who was always complaining about how his model kits didn't fit together right. And when I took a closer look, I realized there was mold lines, there was bits of sprue, all this stuff impeding the parts from fitting together properly. Always take a second look on parts like here and make sure that all the mold lines are gone. Make sure that you haven't filed or shaved with your knife and made a flat area of something that should be rounded. You just want to really take your time and check all these things. Alright, so let's say you have a curved object, and let's say that's the mold line. You got a mold line down there, right? So you're just going to file that away. But sometimes what happens when you're filing, if you get a little too overzealous, and this happens to me all the time, I end up with a flat spot on the model. And what this does is it creates faux mold lines, 2 of them. So now I have 2 mold lines, And they're in a perfectly straight line because obviously I filed in the exact same direction that my mold line was. And so it appears that you didn't take the mold lines off. So it's always very important to make sure when you're filing a rounded surface that it stays round, so that you don't have any mold lines at all. Now here we have one of his little paws. Again, this is a really small piece. It's really detailed. This is gonna seem crazy, but you want to go in between. There are mold lines in between on these toenails. You can go in there and you can shave that right off. The other thing you can do is you can actually file these nails till they're sharp. Which, if you're that wild and crazy, you can totally do it. Make this however you want it to be. Now obviously you can sit here and fiddle with it for hours and hours and hours, and some people do. They really, really want to get everything perfect. And that's totally fine. If you're not quite that crazy about cleanup, then don't do it. But just remember, when you're entering a contest, somebody else will do this. So you need to match their intensity. Some people get really discouraged when they find out they're competing against other really good painters. I try to use that to get me to go the extra mile. And remember, it's not always about winning. It's about doing your very best and maybe learning something in the process. Even if somebody else is entering the same model as you, that's even worse. You know, maybe the one guy, you can totally tell his claws have been filed down and sharpened, or his sword is sharpened, like razor sharp. Stuff like that's kind of cool. Now, is it delicate? Yes, totally. I mean, it's easy to break the models then. But you're not going to be playing with this model, so who cares? It really is just the level of detail and what you're willing to put into your prep that makes the model that much better. The next thing that you can do is take some 600 or above sandpaper, and you can really just get in there and sand out some areas smooth. I took all these mold lines off, and it's just kind of nice to sand out areas, especially on areas like this tail. Again, you want to use really high level sandpaper because you don't want it to leave sanding marks. On the other hand, sometimes you use too high grit and nothing happens. So do some experiments and see what works for you. Some of the areas, like on this lion's belly, you can kind of see the marks, striations from where the digital sculpt, from where the CNC machine made the mold. Oh, I just missed a spot. You see right up in there, there's a mold line right there. So let's get rid of it. Alright, ready to assemble. Once again, in the assembly, we always want to start with dry fits. This model is a little bit complex in the fact that there's a whole bunch of parts going in all kinds of spots. So I'm going to glue on the spots first that I know can only go in one spot, like this leg can only go there. The worst thing you can do is glue that body together, and you glue the body together and then find out you needed to put a part on the inside. I've done that many a time. It really sucks. So let's put this in right there. I'm going to roll up a little bit of this paper towel and just make sure if any of that glue came out, and kind of soak it up. There's a little bit of glue down in there between the leg. Just shove it in there. It just sort of soaks it out. Everything's cool. The worst thing you can have happen is like a bead of glue come up around this edge and then dry that way. That's really hard to fix once everything's done. Hold up. Getting glue everywhere can mar the surface of your plastic. So take care in the application of your glue. So you can see with both of these parts we're going to have to fill some gaps. But they're not too bad, so that's pretty cool. I'm not squeezing very hard on the bottle of glue. I don't want a whole lot. I got a little bead of glue going around the whole outside edge, but not too much because I don't want tons of glue pushing out. And I'll just snap that on. Wipe this down. I'll even wipe in these areas because, again, we don't want the glue to cause an area where the next plastic part can't bond well. There we go. Got that. You can kind of see those areas where I filed away. It's very subtle, but now I'll be able to come back in and put some filler in there, and it should look pretty good. This part is way coming out, but I think that'll be okay. Push it in a little bit. We can fix that with putty or just a scalpel. A rounded scalpel should fix it. So right now I'm going to leave the feet off so that I can get to areas easily. I can putty and we can do some filing and stuff. So let's let that glue dry and we'll be right back. Look at how smooth that is. It's friggin' perfect. So when I'm brushing this smooth, the tip of the brush is obviously much more pliable. It bends really easily. But the back end of the brush is a little bit more firm. So sometimes I'm using the back end of the brush to start smoothing it, and then the front end of the brush to really just kind of finesse it. To get in between these legs right here, I'm going to load the putty at the tip of my tool like that. And I'll put it in there and just kind of squeeze it forward. See how it laid down inside there? And maybe just put a little bit of water on my tool so that it kind of mushes out. Remember, this stuff dissolves in water. So you just gotta kind of, even though the areas are hard to get to, put it on there like that, and then maybe we'll just kind of coax it down into the crack. There we go. Ain't no thing, jelly bean. Really hard areas, we can switch to the knife side of the tool. Just kind of mash it down in there. And add a little bit of water. Maybe go back to our brush. There we go. Alright, sorry, this isn't a gap filling video, but I just thought that was important to see. So right here, again, we see I kind of curved in both sides of the plastic, so there's a little bit of a divot here. That wasn't there normally. And that will give us a spot to lay our putty down in, and then we can smooth it out, smooth with both sides. If I had left it just flat, which I think I did right here, you'll see that sometimes you got to file that area a little bit or something to get it smoother. Otherwise, you're going to have to build up putty. Don't overwork it. You'll come back and do a little sanding at the end. So if it's a little bit too high, that's better than being too low. Because if the putty's too low in the crack, you're going to have to put more putty on and then wait for that to dry. And it's just like this ongoing thing. So a little bit bigger is okay. You may notice that when I apply the putty, I push hard so that it sticks in the gap. But after that, my touch is real smooth so that I can push it around and manipulate it.
So it pays to come back and re-look at areas. So once the water kind of dried off of here, I'm noticing that that my putty's a little bit low here and here. You can still kind of see where everything went through. Maybe the putty just settled a little bit too much, or I brushed it too much. Sometimes you can overbrush an area. So I'm just going to put this putty back on, and I'm going to let it kind of go hump up over a little bit. Not too much, obviously. We don't want this to be the hunchback lion of Notre Dame or whatever. Also remember the longer your putty's been active, the longer it's been since you mixed the putty, the less it's going to want to thin with water and all that stuff. So I usually mix up small batches of putty, and I do this multiple times while I'm working it, because I always want fresh putty. It's just so much easier to work with than if it's starting to harden or starting to set up. Let's put a little bit more right here. The one thing I really like about this Aves epoxy sculpt, especially this particular color, it really does match the gray of the plastic. And it's a nice neutral color, especially if you have to do putty work after you started painting. Gray is a little bit better than, like, say, even the Milliput is that yellowish color, yellowish white. And sometimes that affects the paint that you put on top of it. You don't really have to prime these putties, so if you're just putting the color right on top, it can get kind of weird color-wise.
Another thing you might want to do is just work on one part of the model at a time. Like maybe work on the front of the model or the back of the model, let that part dry, and then move on to the next area. You don't want to get your fingerprints stuck in the putty.
Now, you may think that the underside of the model is you don't have to worry about, but you do. I mean, if this is for display, for competition purposes, everything matters. So fill all the gaps. Now for the mold line on the lion's mane here, I'm going to take little flecks of putty like this, and I'm gonna make little. Think of it like you're making a little mohawk on the edge of his mane here. So I'm just kind of squishing it down on one side, and I'm leaving it up on the other. Once I get all these in there, I can then play with the putty a little bit and turn it into fur.
I'm going to take the blade side of my tool and start cutting the fur into the putty.
Maybe some of the fur will swing this way. Oops. Some of it will swing the opposite way. It looks a little more natural, maybe a little bit. Being real light with my tool is so I don't wreck my little mohawks. My faux hawks. This is the Jonathan Bradford special. Oh, no! Totally knocked that piece off. Okay. Okay, take a deep breath. Grab another piece. The trick is at the base of these hairs, you want it to definitely be blended in with the plastic. So just kind of lightly coax it into place.
Now take your time, because at this level, everything matters.
There we go. I think that will work. All right, for the top part, I'm gonna make little tufts of hair. You notice like he has there's full tufts, like there's pockets of fur up here. So I'm gonna do the same thing, kind of like this. Pull off a little piece and just kind of flatten it out. Not completely flat because we need a little body to it. And then squish it off like that. And we'll apply it. Kind of going back and forth over, just like we did the little mohawks here, going different directions. This one's going to be more so back, forth, back, forth.
For the lion's mane, sculpting in the extra fur, one thing you don't want to do is you don't want to have like a thing of fur that way, then a thing of fur that way, then a thing of fur that way, and a thing of fur that way. That is way too repetitious, won't work. What you do want is maybe the first one like that, maybe a smaller one. Then you could have one coming this way, another one this way, maybe another one that way. So mix it up, make it a little bit erratic. You could even have a piece kind of swiggling around back that way. You know, whatever you want to do. Make it look as natural as possible.
Don't make a pattern, but don't make it uniform either. I guess that's the same thing, isn't it? Key here is you want it to look natural. Don't make these too thick, because then it'll look like, you'll be like, whoa, there's a line of hair going down the back of the lion that is clearly way too high. So we just want it to be kind of, naturally going with what is already sculpted there. Make sure that where the tufts end, down at the end parts, that you make it look like the hair's, like it's hair. You don't want the strands to end before that. And they can also split out a little bit. So just a little added realism there.
So as you can see, by manipulating the sculpt, you can make your model unique and stand out from the others.
I'll show you a couple other things you can do on this robe here. I've cleaned it all off, but I'm also going to come in with my blade and very carefully cut back into where his robe or his cape goes over the arm right here. And basically what we're going to do, we're going to cut it back a little bit. And man, you got to be really, really careful here. That you don't just totally destroy your finger, because you are putting quite a bit of pressure to cut in. Again, when I cut, I kind of push forward, and that helps give me like a sawing motion. And I'm just going to do a little bit at a time. Basically, you start getting that part of the cape to roll up a little bit. So it looks like, so it doesn't look like it was molded in there. It looks like it's on top. A little bit more natural. Then we just get in here real close, and I'm just gonna kind of scrape out underneath. I'm using the tip of the blade. I'm just gonna kind of scrape out underneath that little ledge that we created. This gives us good separation and just makes the cape look like it's a separate piece. Now we do the same thing on this side. It doesn't seem like it, but little things like this do make a difference in the final piece. It makes it look more real, more believable. The other thing right here, you'll notice that because of the way the plastic was molded or the way the mold was, that area right there is really thick compared to the rest of these folds. So you can just come in and cut out a little of that. I take little shaves, one little shave at a time. It's a little bit better. And then what we'll do is we'll take our file. And kind of just file it, cut into that. We'll file this side as well. Cut down a little bit more on this side. Just kind of go back and forth, take a little chunk at a time. Basically, we want to make that piece look more and more like that, and just the cloth is folded down that way. That looks better already. So in my gap filling video, I showed you how to fill a gap with fur, but here's another clever gap filling idea. A great way to get rid of this this little crack in the sculpt right here, where the two pieces came together, filling that gap. We're just gonna put another fold of fabric, actually. So I'll just put a little sausage of fabric in there and have it come all the way down to the end. At the end here, we want to taper it in so it looks like it's folding under this piece. And this is just a really cool way, instead of just filling that gap, which would be a little bit boring, we're actually going to add. You don't have to be the best sculptor either to do this, because you're not really making anything super exciting. But you do want to make it look like a fold in the fabric, so just kind of work it back and forth. There. We'll fix the top of it up here. We'll cut this off so it cuts in just like that. You want to respect the look of the original sculpt as much as possible. So you want it to look, be flowing the same way and everything. But I think that looks pretty cool. This guy looks kind of like a wild man. So let's give him a piece of hair coming off that comes out across his face. Here's the hard part. Gotta stick it on, get it to stick, hopefully. Then we're gonna run it down the side of the face. So that it actually touches the face. that. Make some splits in the hair. That little bit of putty off. And then, whoa. I'm just taking my tool and twisting it like that under the hair to pull it up. And maybe pull this up. Very carefully separated those two hairs, or that one hair into two. But then when we paint it, we can paint multiple hairs in there. Look cool. It would look so cool. So I'll switch to the scooper side of my tool. Let's see if we can't get that hair to pop up a little bit. I think that'll work. So once the putty's dry, we're gonna just do some light filing. You also notice that I got the tail on and the other feet, and we'll fill those cracks here a little bit later. But you can come back in and just kind of sand this all really nice and flush. Very light touch again. You can also come in with some 600 grit sandpaper and just lightly, really lightly sand the areas. Sometimes if you curve the sandpaper like this, you can get into some of the harder to reach areas. Makes it like a curved file or something. So make sure, if you're not sure about the grade of sandpaper you have, if it's not fine enough, just sand little parts, like maybe sand the bottoms of the feet. Make sure there's not big lines, because that would be bad news. It's hard to get rid of. The one neat thing about these plastic figures, unlike the PVC figures, you can use rattle can primers. Typically for display figures or figures that I want to do at a higher level, I always airbrush on the primer. It gives me a better, smoother coat. I have more control that way, so I prefer to do that. Alright, I hope you got a lot out of this advanced model prep video. It really does pay to spend a little extra time and make sure those gaps are filled properly and that all the mold lines are off. So what did we learn today? Number 1. Bad gap filling and missed mold lines can ruin the perfect paint job. So spend some extra time making sure everything's just right. Number 2, we learned that by beveling the edges of two connecting parts, we can make it easier to fill that gap. Number 3, you don't have to just fill gaps. You can sculpt interesting things on top, like fur, hair, or even an extra fold in the fabric. Number 4, be sure to use a real light touch when filing or sanding your model. You don't want to take away more than you need to. Number 5, when filing a round surface, make sure you use a rounded motion with your file. You don't want to create flat lines, which could look like extra mold lines at the end. Number 6, we remove some excess plastic from the edges of a cape to make it look more in scale and more realistic. Alright, that's a wrap. Thanks again for being part of the Miniature Monthly team. Now go paint something.